r/AskReddit, historians of Reddit, what is the biggest fuck you moment in history? A pirate known as Jane Leffert had a bounty of $500 put on him by a governor. So he put a $5,000 bounty on the governor. No you. When Otto von Bismarck was about 50, he was walking down a street when a man ran up to him and shot him 5 times. Otto then turned around and began to beat the absolute shit out of him until some armed guards come to help him. When they inspected Otto for wounds, they found that all 5 hit, but they all either just grazed him or bounced off his ribs. Literally the Iron Chancellor. German quality. Napoleon invited his brother-in-law to speak with him before his coronation as emperor to remind the brother-in-law that he objected to Napoleon marrying Josephine because Napoleon would amount to nothing. Now this is the kind of petty fuck you I can get behind. So when France exiles Napoleon Bonaparte the first time, they didn't think to change out military personnel. So he basically rolls up to the first French outpost he gets to, says backquotes up and begins reassembling an army. By the time he gets to Paris, he's got enough forces that France is like, well, welcome back. I would say the moment that Rollo swore allegiance to the French king, the bishops present suggested that Rollo kiss the king's foot as a sign of submission. It was probably an idea intended to humiliate Rollo and was not taken very well. After some discussion, it was agreed that one of Rollo's men would do it. However, the person chosen lifted the king's foot and, without bending down, brought it up to his mouth. Not surprisingly, the king fell over amid general laughter in the court. Following this amusing scene, the king and his men swore to honor the concession to Rollo. That's great. Just fucking flip the king over instead. That whole image just made me laugh. In Anno Domini 37, the new Roman Emperor Gaius, better known by the nickname Caligula, built a bridge across the sea. It stretched 3 miles across the deep blue waters of the Bay of Naples at ancient Rome's most fashionable seaside resort of Baiae. But Caligula's was no ordinary bridge. It was a temporary, floating structure built on wooden pontoons, a costly and impressive feat of engineering. It served a single purpose before being dismantled. On a day of boiling heat watched by crowds of spectators, Caligula rode across the bridge. His armor glinted in the sunlight, for the 24-year-old emperor had dressed himself in the golden breastplate of the legendary Greek hero Alexander the Great. On the following day, Caligula made the journey in reverse, this time riding in a chariot, followed by soldiers of his personal guard. It was a pointless piece of showmanship, lost on the majority of the crowd, several of whom fell drunkenly to their deaths in the sea after 2 days partying. One historian claimed Caligula pulled the stunt to disprove a prophecy that he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Baiae. Threatening to make his horse a consul was also in the same vein. It wasn't a serious consideration born out of madness, but rather an insult to the Senate. Either my horse can do a better job than any of you, or I can make my horse consul and you can't do anything about it. In the 1970s, a small town of Vulcan, West Virginia asked for state funding to replace a bridge into town. The state legislature refused to grant Vulcan the funding they needed. Instead, the town appealed to the Soviet Union for aid. After hearing about the request, the state legislature immediately granted over $1 million for the town to build a new bridge. If a small town in WV asking for Soviet funding in the middle of the Cold War isn't a big middle finger to the state government, then I don't know what is. The funny part is that 2 Soviet representatives at the US Embassy actually came over to look at the broken bridge and seriously considered funding the rebuilding to piss off the Americans. This requires some background. The Spartans were famously blunt. They were trained to get to the point when speaking, instead of using artsy and beautiful language that would have been common at the time, by being bitten on the thumb if they became long-winded. Now to the meat. Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, sent the Spartans a letter saying, "Would you like me to enter your land as friend or foe?" The Spartans responded with one word, "Neither." Philip was irate. He then sent another long-winded message. "If once I enter into your territories, I will destroy you all, never to rise again." The Spartans then sent back one word, "If." It was like putting your head in a lion's mouth, and I love it. British prisoner of war in Nazi Germany stitches a quilt. The Nazis put it out for show. Hidden in Morse code stitched in were the words "fuck Hitler" and "God save the Queen." This is already one of my favorite threads in Reddit history. Galvarino, Chilean warrior who had both his hands cut off by the conquistadors for raising arms against the Spanish. Instead of letting himself serve as a message of helplessness in the face of the invaders, the crazy bastard strapped swords to his stumps and went on the warpath. When Germanic tribes invaded Britain after the Romans left, they named the native Celts Wellisk, meaning foreigner, even though they themselves were the foreigners. That later became the word Welsh, which the English promptly adopted for phrases like Welsh on a bed. Too long didn't read. All of history has been one giant etymological middle finger to the Welsh. Yeah, but the Welsh language is itself a middle finger to English speakers. In the late 1980s, Nintendo and Sony developed a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo. Nintendo then pulled out of the partnership and opted to work with Philips instead and released the CDI. This move was highly frowned upon because Nintendo had decided to ditch a fellow Japanese company over a foreign one. So Sony picked up the pieces of the project and tried to partner with Sega. The board of directors turned the idea down, saying that's a stupid idea. Sony doesn't know how to make hardware. They don't know how to make software either. Why would we want to do this? At the end, Sony released a game system by the name of PlayStation in 1994 to compete with the Nintendo 64 and outsold their former partners nearly 3:1. Plus it marked the first time that Nintendo wasn't top dog since they released the Northeasts. The reply of the Zaporozhian Cossacks is the best response to a demand for surrender ever. In response to requests by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire to desist attacks and submit, Zaporozhian Cossacks to the Turkish Sultan. O Sultan, Turkish devil and am devil's kith and kin, secretary to Lucifer himself. What the devil kind of knight art thou that canst not slay a hedgehog with your naked ass? The devil shits, and your army eats. Thou shalt not, thou son of a whore, make subjects of Christian sons. We have no fear of your army. By land and by sea we will battle with thee. Fuck thy mother. Thou Babylonian scullion, Macedonian wheelwright, brewer of Jerusalem, goat fucker of Alexandria, swineherd of Greater and Lesser Egypt, pig of Armenia, Podolian thief, catamite of Tartary, hangman of Commandments, and fool of all the world and underworld, an idiot before God, grandson of the serpent, and the Krikinardic, pig snout, mare's ass, slaughterhouse cur, unchristened bro, screw thine own mother. So the Zaporozhians declare, you lowlife. You won't even be herding pigs for the Christians. Now we'll conclude, for we don't know the date, and don't own a calendar, the moon's in the sky, the year with the Lord, the day's the same over here as it is over there, for this kiss our ass. The first cell phone. The first call ever made from a cell phone was to a competitor's landline. Big dick energy. Tell me more. Martin Cooper, a Motorola employee and inventor of the first cell phone, called his competition at Bell Labs. On 30th September 1938, a treaty called the Munich Agreement was signed, causing Germany's annexation of Sudetenland, a region of western Czechoslovakia, where many German people lived. It was signed by the leaders of the UK, France, Italy, and Germany. The UK and France signed it because Hitler promised that he won't go to war if he got the Sudetenland. We all know how that turned out. But that's not all. The biggest fuck you to Czechoslovakia was that they weren't invited to the meeting. Yes, they weren't invited to the meeting about their own region. Also, France was an ally of Czechoslovakia at the time. So yeah, thanks for the support, France. Not the biggest, probably, but the first that came to mind. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's response to the Nazi demand that Bass don't surrender, nuts. The construction and use of the Warwolf, supposedly the largest trebuchet ever built. When it was disassembled it would fill up 30 wagons. So anyways, King Edward I built this to siege a Scottish castle. But before it was even built, the Scottish people tried to surrender. To which Edward responded with a prompt no. In actuality he responded with, you do not deserve any grace, but must surrender to my will. In other words, I built this trebuchet over 40 days and I'm most definitely going to use it, and proceeded to use a trebuchet anyways. 30 wagons to transport it, and 40 days to assemble it, and they expected him to just pack it up when they surrendered? AWW hell no. Big Ed gonna chuck some rocks. Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, one of them with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send a very fast working one to Moscow, and I certainly won't have to send another to Joseph Stalin. Julius Caesar's death. At least he died surrounded by friends. The first recorded incident of a group project where most of the group doesn't do the fucking work. I love it, because there are several levels. There were about 40 conspirators. Caesar received 23 stab wounds. So right off the bat, and not even accounting for people managing to stab him multiple times, about half the folks involved did jack shit. But then later his body was examined, and the doctor concluded that only one of those was properly fatal on its own. Even of the people that actually did any work at all, just one got it right and didn't half-ass things. That's a group project. Ferruccio Lamborghini was a rich man owning his company that built tractors. He talked to Ferrari about the imperfections of his car and how to improve them, and they basically laughed at a young tractor mechanic trying to tell them about sport cars. So he decided to start making luxury sport cars to compete with Ferrari, and thus, the rivalry was born. So I'd say the middle finger of this guy to Ferrari was pretty noticeable. The Battle of Alesia. Julius Caesar's attacking some Gauls in modern day France, and they go hide in a castle on top of a hill. Caesar's army isn't big enough to take them all at once, and the Gauls have reinforcement coming, so a siege is impossible. So Caesar just builds a bigger castle around the one he's attacking. He literally just built 2 walls back to back in a ring around the castle. The first Gaul army was already too small to defeat Caesar, and his fortifications only gave him a greater advantage. The reinforcement were also unable to defeat Caesar's army, now that he was behind several layers of spike pits and both earthen and wooden walls. Plus the Gauls inside had no way to communicate with the reinforcement outside, so they couldn't coordinate attacks. Both Gallic armies were defeated as they attacked Caesar's newly built fortifications, and Caesar emerged victorious. It's probably my favorite battle of all time. The Romans had to build over 20 miles of walls, right? And they did it really fast. Henry VIII divorcing Catherine of Aragon. Henry VIII, I want a divorce. Church, we don't do that here. Henry VIII, I'll start my own church, with blackjack and hookers.